Hello, and welcome to the Nature Journal Connection. I'm your host, John Muir Laws. The last time we met, you found me investigating this crook-necked squash plant, and I was diving through the leaves trying to find the stages, the different stages of development of the fruit. So going from the female flower all the way to my finished crook-necked squash fruit. And if you remember, there was one stage, one part of that development that I had missed. There was a missing link. And it went from little buds, then there's a jump and the flower was wilting and kind of going on its way up. So I decided, I'm just going to keep a really sharp eye on this plant. I want to catch that stage. I was wondering why. Why is it that I can find numerous examples of all these other stages, but there's this little part in the middle that was missing? Well, this morning, I got up and I got out here and I looked at this plant and moved a few leaves aside, and there it was. There was my missing link staring back at me. I was really, really excited. So what I did is I was thinking like, oh, I've got to journal about this today. But at that point, my schedule was really busy, and I thought I'll just come back a little bit later this afternoon, and I'm going to get right on this. So now here we are. It's a little bit later this afternoon. I look back in here and I want to show you what I found. It's already wilted. So that open flower stage, it wasn't there last night. This morning, poof, full open. And here a little bit later in the afternoon, it's all wilted down. So this is really interesting to me. So I'm thinking now about the rate of change in this. Slow, 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 slow. And then there's like this quick movement. There's this one moment. And I'm going to now, what I'm going to do, so in my journal, I'm going to get in there and from memory, record as much as I can remember about that open flower. And then I'm going to just do a deep dive into this. And I'll bet that there's lots of interesting structure that I can still see and examine in here. So that's kind of a cool example of thinking about a change in the rate of change. And I'll get to record that in my journal now. But the big treat for today's episode is that when I'm done, I'm going to add one last level of attention to the squash and the journal page that I'm working on. And I think what you're going to see is that that extra step is going to crystallize and clarify a whole bunch of my thinking about this. I'm going to walk you through what that process is, because you can do exactly the same thing with any of your nature journal pages. You kind of get to this point of where you figure like, oh yeah, I'm done, right? So this is the step beyond that that is going to allow you to see all sorts of other really interesting and beautiful aspects of whatever phenomenon you're playing with. So I'm now going to just do a deep dive on this little wilting squash flower, a little bit of a memory sketch of what I saw. And then we are going to kind of go into when you get to that stage, you're sort of feeling, yeah, I'm done. Just this extra little bit that you can add on any journal page, and you'll see the doors that it opens up in your thinking. Let's take a look.
My first priority is to get as much information down on the page as I can about this flower before it wilts any further. So what I started doing is just tracing the fruit and the overall shape of the flower. I did that in a really light colored pencil, and once that was down on my page, I could go over that in pen and draw in all the details, but on top of a framework that I'd already established from the tracing. That gave me the basic shape and proportions of what I was looking at. I was interested in the shapes of the veins and the curls of how it was wilted and twisted up at this point. Once that was solid, I could get out some gouache and watercolor and paint on top of that to show the colors at this point. I still had an image in my mind of what the flower looked like when I saw it this morning. So I did a memory drawing of that. Now, a memory drawing is not going to be perfect, it's not going to be exact, but it's the best that I can do in the circumstances. So I just added a little note that this was a memory drawing.
If you think that flowers are interesting and beautiful on the outside, your mind will be blown when you start taking them apart and looking at them on the inside as well. This is a wonderful place to think about the ideas of structure and function. What is this for? How does this work? On a small flower, these details can be hard to see, but on a large blossom, like the squash, you can carefully peel back the petals and reveal the structures inside. And when I did with my squash blossom, I was rewarded by this incredible pistil. The pistil is the pollen capture structure of a flower. So if pollen comes into a flower, perhaps on an insect or blown in by the wind, the sticky pads on the top of the pistil will hold on to the little grains of pollen, and the flower can be pollinated and turn into a full fruit. In this case, the pistil was this strange column that stuck down in the very middle of the flower, had 4 big sticky pads on the bottom. I used my words, pictures, and numbers to carefully document and describe the wonders that I found. Now that I've observed my plant from both the inside and the outside, I'm ready to take it to the next level. To do this, I'm going to use what scientists call metacognition. Metacognition is thinking about the way that you think and noticing the way that you notice. I look down at my journal page and say to myself, let's see here, what have I observed? Are there any other observations that I've made that I haven't documented here on my page? If so, I'll put them down now. And what about the questions? Can I come up with even richer questions than the ones that I've already asked? Sometimes the initial questions that you write down can spur you to get the question behind the question, the even more interesting question than the first ones that you put on the page. So take a look at your questions and see if those can prompt you to make even more interesting connections. And what about those it reminds me of? Is there anything else that you've seen or experienced, or studied, or read, or explored before that you can somehow bring into this series of observations? What can you take from your prior experience and apply to this situation? So we're just going to take a look at our I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of, the ones we've got down on the page, and see if we can go a little bit further than that. But wait, there's more. Because I also want to look down at my page and notice, are there any places on my page where I'm studying and wondering and thinking about basically the same ideas? For instance, on the bottom of my page, I was looking at the pistil of the flower. So I'm going to draw a box around that section of my observations and label it pistillate flower. Here's the pistil of my flower. So I'm going to make a little label for part of my journaling page. Now when I look down at my notes, it's easier for me to see the relationships between different sorts of observations. Here's this whole section where I'm looking at the pistil of the flower. That's all in a box.
I think I might need some more numbers on this page as well. I'm going to add a few notes about whether I've drawn something life size, 1x, half size, 0.5x, or 2.5 times larger than it is, 2.5x. Those are just some shorthand ways of showing the scale of any drawing that you've done. You could also use lines or arrows to show relationships and connections between different things on your page. For instance, I have a little sketch of my memory drawing of that first view I had of this flower in full bloom. Then I've got a careful drawing and illustration of it a little bit later on that same day after that flower had wilted. So I can connect those two. There's a relationship between them, and that's time. So I'm going to draw in an arrow showing that first it was this, and then a few hours later it changed into this. How could you use lines, arrows, and other connectors on your own page? Another way to think about your experience and the observations you've just made is to see if you can come up with a big title for your entire nature journaling experience and put it there on the page with all of your observations. This can be playful and fun, as well as helping you just get a little bit of perspective to sit back and think about what's the big picture here? What am I looking at? What title would really summarize these observations? In this case, I've been looking at a flower that only has female reproductive structures in it. Again, what scientists call the pistil of the flower. So I'm going to draw a big scientific symbol for female, that's a circle with a plus on the bottom, and have that female symbol squashing the word squash. So I'm going to have it smashing down on the word squash. I'm going to make these in big bubble letters and then color them in using colors that I've seen other places on the page. So that's just a playful way of adding a title. But it also just helps me back up, get some perspective, and think about what's the big idea here? What is my big lesson learned? Later on, that's going to help me glance at my nature journal page and remember, oh yeah, that was that time I was looking at that big female flower. And look, there in the box, there's all my notes about the pistil. That is metacognition.
Your nature journaling challenge this week is to use metacognition to push your thinking just a little bit further on whatever it is that you've been investigating and exploring. So get all your observations, your questions, and your connections down on your paper. We've got our words, pictures, and numbers. And then when your brain begins to say, oh yeah, I'm done, stop and back up. Look down at that page and say to yourself, like, okay, what is the big idea that I'm playing with here? And create titles, create subtitles, use arrows, lines, boxes, or frames, areas of tone connecting parts of your journal. Use all these different elements together to show relationships between ideas. You can also back up and think, are there any questions that I came up with but I didn't include on my page? What about observations? Oh, yeah, that's right. I didn't mention that there are little hairs all over this part. I'm going to put that in. Or a little it reminds me of that might have been left out. Just gives you one more chance to see, is there anything else that I have experienced and could put down on my page? This is my chance to do that. But also just to be backing up and thinking about the big idea of what's going on here. You also might want to experiment with just writing a sentence or two that summarizes your most interesting insights or thoughts from creating that nature journal page. All of this is getting you back and looking down at your experience from a higher level and seeing if you can get just a little bit more out of that set of observations. Try it with your own journal and see what happens. And I think that you'll discover that then when you look down at your nature journal page, it will tell the story of your experience and your discoveries in a way that's much richer and more interesting to you. That helps us learn from our own experiences and observations and carry those into our next round of adventures with our nature journal. And until next time, this is your Nature Journal Connection.
Do do do.